All right, well, welcome. This is Kevin Wills, and I'm the VP of Professional Services for Nortec Communications. I have a little over 20 years of experience in IT, about 11 of those years as a consultant for Nortec. And although I've been working in IT for quite some time now, I've seen few changes that have been as disruptive as the cloud services movement. I was actually around to see the tail end of the mainframe to client server days, and I think that's probably the closest change to what we're seeing today. But in any case, I hope to share with you guys some of what I've learned along the way here. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk today about 4 basic concepts. And for those of you with some cloud experience already, the section about what is cloud might be a bit of a review, but please bear with me as we level set the definition. And the next thing we're going to talk about is why you should care about the cloud. And the truth is that it's not going away, and it has some distinct advantages over premises-based solutions. After we've talked about the what and the why, I want to cover an approach that I've found useful in making sense of the cloud, and really IT in general. And this is the services-based approach to IT. And then finally, I hope to help you start thinking about what you might consider moving to the cloud and what you should keep on premise, and maybe how you make some of those decisions. So in terms of format, this is really meant to be an informal session, and I'm open to any questions you might have along the way. If it doesn't make sense, please stop me. I want to make sure that your time is well spent with me today. My presentation is about 30 minutes or so, and then whatever time we've got left, we can use for questions. And Allison, I'm going to ask you if you could please just kind of barge in if any questions on the IM, because I'm actually not watching that screen.
Sure. I will do that for you.
Okay, so the big question, what is cloud? There are all different types of cloud, and we're going to talk about some of them in detail. You might hear people talk about IaaS or SaaS, public cloud, private cloud. The cloud is basically just computing sold as services. And all of these things have one thing in common, and that's that to access the cloud, you have to traverse the internet in some way. The traditional definition of cloud, the cloud is not in your local server room, it's somewhere on the internet. And this poses a lot of questions and challenges, but there's nothing there that's insurmountable. So with that, let's dive in. So drilling into the details a little bit more, it kind of helps to understand what's under the hood. And in general, cloud offerings are going to map to existing on-premise solutions. This is not always the case, but in general, this is true. Most of the things that we can get on-premise, we can get in the cloud, and vice versa. In a lot of cases, particularly with Microsoft solutions, the cloud offerings run on what could be an on-premise solution. For example, Exchange Online, which is a portion of Office 365, runs on Exchange. Windows Azure infrastructure as a service, basically run your VMs in Microsoft's cloud, is all powered by Hyper-V. And actually, I'll show you a quick example of the on-prem versus cloud Azure here in a second. Also, the infrastructure providers are building extremely robust systems, and they're building them on a scale that most companies are not going to be able to build themselves. Providers are spending billions of dollars building out the infrastructure, the platforms, and the software to support the cloud-based solutions. And they're doing it with an efficiency and a cost savings that we can't get because of the scale that they're building them. And actually, Microsoft has about 20 data centers in progress right now that they're building at $1 billion a piece. So they're investing very heavily in this. So behind the scenes, they're using automation, and they're speeding up the delivery of the services and making them so that we can do some self-service, and they're really reducing the requirement for human intervention for basic maintenance type stuff. And because of that, and because of the amount of hardware that they're buying, the discounts that they're getting on the actual hardware they're running things on, they're saving a lot of. So with all this said, once they've got this gigantic infrastructure built out, they have to manage it. And this kind of gets into the why subject, because it's not us managing it, which is actually a benefit in a lot of ways. But it is also a defining feature of the what. So I wanted to mention that. I thought it was worth mentioning. So here's an example here. This is Windows Azure Pack, and basically this is Hyper-V with an overlay on top of it. And this is an on-premise Hyper-V system running the Azure Pack. So let's compare this to Windows Azure Portal in the cloud. You guys even see the difference there? I flip back here. It's pretty similar. And that's because, they are tweaking things and they are, making their software custom for, Azure. But in a lot of ways, the underpinnings are the same, which is kind of neat. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the types of services that are available to us. There's other services than the three that I've got on the slide here, but these are the three most common types, and so these are the ones I'm going to focus on here. So software as a service is something like Salesforce or Office 365. With software as a service, you typically pay for a license or a seat. And SaaS solutions typically have a specific purpose like email. SaaS solutions can be bought online and can be quickly implemented. I mean, you can go out with a credit card and purchase a software as a service and start using it today. And this is kind of a blessing and a curse because we want to not only leverage SaaS, but to some extent control our users' usage of it. We don't want everybody going out and buying a service that does the same exact thing. So infrastructure as a service is outsourcing of the equipment. And basically, this is paying for the use of a virtual machine that's running on somebody else's hardware. And the infrastructure as a service, or IaaS models, are typically usage-based. So the more highly used or the more resources you're assigning to a VM, the more expensive it is to run. And IaaS is a good solution for DR. It's a good solution for test and dev, or when the cost of using it for production purpose is favorable. So for a lower usage machine, it may make sense to run that out in the cloud. So platform as a service it's a little bit more blurry, but basically this is the outsourcing of the hardware and the operating system both, but we get control over the actual service. So some examples would be like database services, like SQL services on Microsoft's Azure, where you basically are using their SQL instance, or maybe Amazon's RDS. So platform as a service typically has usage-based billing associated with it as well, but you get a little bit more control. This is a type of situation where you would often have developers using because they want to have a little bit more control. So in addition to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, we also have this concept of public cloud versus private cloud. And some would argue that there is no private cloud, there's only public cloud. And if you strictly follow the traditional definition of cloud existing outside your premises, that you have to traverse the internet to get to it, this is really true. With that said, there's this idea that one can manage their own data center like a provider would, that a company can set up things like automating the setup of virtual machines and doing self-service and maximizing the use of the hardware by carefully managing the resource assignment of VMs and things like that. So what I showed you before with the Azure Pack, that's essentially what this is. So if you believe in the private cloud, then Azure Pack would be an example of that. And really, I'm saying this not to open the debate on public versus private cloud, but just to recognize that the terminology is out there, and if we really do believe in private cloud, that automation and hardware maximization are key components of this. There's a difference between public cloud, private cloud, and co-location. Co-location meaning you basically have a data center where you have services running. That's not really private cloud unless you introduce those components of automation and maximization of the hardware. But for the purpose of the rest of this presentation, we're basically going to focus just on the public cloud. So when we talk about what is cloud, we all understand that the cloud exists somewhere, but it exists somewhere that we can't see. And this might raise some flags, but the reality is that the cloud can be quite secure. The reason why is simply because the providers who are investing billions in these data centers, this $20 billion that Microsoft has out there right now on data centers that they're building, they can't afford to make that investment and then have you as a consumer not trust them. So they're spending tons of time and money to make sure that the solutions are secure. So they're investing in physical security, things like guards and biometric scanners, man traps, and other fancy means to make sure that nobody unauthorized is going to be able to get into the data center in the first place. And then they're going to create logical separations, and this is really making sure that no one else can see in their neighbor's windows. They're separating the duties to make sure that the guy who's changing out the hard drives, for example, doesn't have the ability to read them. They're making sure that whoever has to work on your system, like for Office 365, for example, if you put in a ticket, nobody is going to have administrative access to your system until a ticket's generated. And then temporarily, somebody's going to have just the level of access that they need in order to solve the ticket. And once the ticket's closed out, that access is taken away again. So they take that very seriously. And then they're also employing hackers. And these are white hat hackers that basically just pound on their own systems, and they make sure that if there's a problem, that they're going to find it first before somebody else does. All of this should make us feel a little more willing to trust a well-known provider. And this isn't even the full extent of the investment that they're making in security. So we have to kind of believe that cloud is actually secure, and in a lot of cases more secure than our on-prem solutions. So now that we talked a little bit about the cloud let's talk about the why. So why do I care about the cloud? We covered the scale of cloud solutions somewhat already, but I want to mention it again because it's really important. It allows small companies to enjoy features and stability that could only be enjoyed by larger companies in the past. And for larger companies, there's a benefit for them too, because it allows them to scale without any concern. They're never going to outgrow it. It also changes the bucket that is pulled from to pay for IT. So some IT costs can now become a monthly recurring expense or an OpEx instead of hardware, for example, or a CapEx. It also allows us to focus on the problems of the business instead of technical problems, always fighting fires. And that's really what companies are looking for us to do as IT professionals. They care about solving the business problem, not the problems like patching disk space and failed hardware and things like that. It also opens the door for a different set of disaster recovery solutions, because now we can create duplicates of production environments in the cloud for disaster recovery, and we don't even need another data center to do that. We can just spin it up in the cloud. And we don't have to buy duplicate hardware to do that either, because it's all virtualized. And the cloud solutions also offer us agility. If I want to, I can whip out my credit card and spin up a VM in the cloud today. And we can do that with Amazon. We can do that with Microsoft. We can do that with lots of different providers. I'm not saying that's the right way to go about doing it. In fact, I would encourage you not to do that without at least a second thought. But the point is that we can. So when the time comes that we need something fast, the cloud's going to help us get that. So let's talk a little bit about the services-based approach to IT. And the services-based approach is a way of defining what we are providing for our internal customers. It focuses on the functions, not how we would specifically implement it. You kind of think of it as a menu. Like when we go to a restaurant and we get a menu, we don't get the recipes. We get a list of appetizers, entrees, desserts, and they all have a description and a cost. We care what the food tastes like, but we don't worry ourselves with the type of pan that they're using to cook it in. We don't care about the specific spices. We don't care about the temperature that they're using to cook at it. It's unnecessary because there's a chef who's a professional. He's paid to do this. He's paid to do nothing but cook. So what else does the services-based approach really do for us? I mean, there's many advantages to this, and we'll go into more detail on each one of these components. But I think two of the major ones is that it makes IT more modular, and it helps us prioritize our IT projects. When we talk about the services-based approach, it's important for us to define our offerings. And quite simply, this is a list of what's available to me as an end user and what those things do. Once we know what's available, we can start thinking about what we don't have. And this is where consulting with the business becomes key. We want to talk to the department heads, we want to talk to the leaders, and we want to ask them, what would you love to be able to do today that you can't? And using this input, we can potentially add new offerings, whether they be, cloud or on-premise. Maybe it's a software as a service solution that we can go out and purchase that's going to solve this problem for them. But we're looking for things that really add value. And these are things that will add value because they're things that people have asked for. We always want to include our business in those decisions. And then finally, as we reflect on the list that we come up with, we need to think about the things that we're going to remove from the list. What do people not really use? What doesn't add value? And how much are we spending on things that no one asked for or even uses? Especially for those software as a service type solutions. If nobody's using it, it's just monthly recurring expense that's just wasted. When we talk about functionality versus specific technology, we're really forming a more end-user-centric view of the world. We want to deliver functionality that allows end users to do their jobs and to do them well. We also want the latitude to be able to use maybe a Microsoft solution today and maybe something else like Google down the road. And this really requires that we're focusing on the functionality over the technology. But once we do that, our world really opens up because we don't have to stick with a specific line of products. We don't have to do everything in Amazon. We don't have to do everything in Microsoft. We can choose the best of breed. And when we do that, there will be challenges with integration, and this has always been the case with third parties, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud. But the cloud is also creating solutions in that arena. And a good example of how the cloud solves the problems it creates is cloud-based single sign-on solutions. Solutions that are going to allow us to manage users' multiple identities in a single location. So I want to go off on a bit of a tangent here to talk about the identities in the single sign-on. Because once we enter the cloud, management of identities can become more complicated. We no longer are going to have single Active Directory usernames and passwords for everything. We're going to have usernames and passwords for other services that we access. One user can have many identities, many usernames and passwords. So if we get past remembering the credentials, everything's okay, right? But we got to think beyond that. Like, what happens when that employee leaves? What about when they're shared accounts? Like, you have a shared account for marketing for Dropbox, and one person leaves, but 5 people still need to use it. There's a bunch of ways that we can handle this, and one is through federation. And federation is basically when we use our own central directory, our Active Directory, to authenticate users to third-party applications. This is going to work really good for things like Office 365, but with things like Dropbox, not so much. In that case, we're going to need something like a single sign-on application. And Azure Active Directory is one example of that, and there's a bunch of them out there. But basically, with this type of solution, we can centralize the management of all those usernames and passwords for those software as a service applications and gain some level of control over that again. Now, I won't go into too much more detail on this. I wanted to kind of let you know that that's out there, if you weren't aware that that stuff is out there. And, we can absolutely talk in further detail later if you want to talk about the single sign-on some more. So prioritization. We all deal with prioritization as part of our daily jobs. And I would argue that almost no one is going to be able to reach all of their goals in a single workday. And that means that we have to decide what to tackle today and what's going to wait. I mean, it might be time, effort, or cost, but some problems are just going to have to be solved later. There's a few things that I try to keep in mind with regard to prioritization. First, I like to think of IT as a roadmap. So IT is going to make goals based on the needs of the business, again, including those, business leaders. And then we're going to prioritize that, and we're going to put it into a rough order. This is basically our IT roadmap. So deciding what we're going to do first, the projects with the most favorable benefit-cost ratio are always going to be in my do first bucket. We want to do things that will realize benefits right away and be low or no cost or effort. And then the last thing we kind of need to keep in mind on this is not to try and do it all at once. And I like the example of gradually turning up the lights instead of blinding all the users with a flash grenade. We want to make sure that we're introducing change slowly so that it's manageable and people are not getting upset. With regards to modularity, there's always going to be some level of integration that's going to have to occur. But with the services-based approach, it allows us to think in such a way that we can remove and replace components. And so much of on-premise solutions have to be custom built, and they've got a lot of tentacles and things. It's less so with a lot of the cloud applications. And this example here of the network card, I mean, if you think about, just something as basic as a network card, if a network card goes bad, we're not going to fix the network card. We're not going to hire someone to build a new one. We're going to get a NIC that's got a similar specification, and we're going to swap it out. And we want to think about our cloud architecture in the same way. We want it to be modular so that if our solution for email, for example, is not working out, we can pick it up and we can move it to another solution that does meet our needs. So you might ask, how do I develop this service-based view? And it's pretty simple. We're basically just asking, what are my users using? And, we might have this huge Exchange infrastructure that we've built out to make it fully redundant and site resilient and highly available and all these wonderful things. But when we ask the user, what are you using? They're using email. And this is really true with anything. I've got a bunch of examples here, but the bottom line is that almost every available on-premise service can be replaced with a cloud counterpart. And when we start thinking about the solutions as services rather than the specific technology, it makes it a lot more interchangeable. It opens up a lot of options for us. So the key is just focus on functionality, not on the specific technology. So the cloud sounds great, right? Why not move everything to the cloud? Why not make everything someone else's problem and just write a check every month? And maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't. There's a lot of considerations that need to be made. Some people promote the whole idea of, lift and shift, take everything and put it in the cloud. And the truth is that this scenario isn't one size fits all. The truth is that most of us are going to be living with a hybrid cloud solution. Some of our stuff is going to go to the cloud, and some of it is going to stay on premise. And some of the things we need to think about are the costs. and there are many components of cost that we're going to get into. I'm actually going to drill into each one of these components. Also, how much have I invested in my on-premise solution? What's it going to take for me to move to the cloud? It's almost never free. I mean, there's always some cost that's going to be associated with it. And the SLAs are not likely to be an issue, but this is something that we need to consider as well. And then finally, compliance. Do you have compliance requirements within your organization? So the cloud is cheaper, right? Well, not always. And that's why it's so important for us to do our due diligence. And I'm not saying this because I want to discourage you from moving to the cloud. I say this because it's easy to be shocked with the costs if you don't do the proper research. So let's look at some of the examples of costs. The costs are very different between cloud solutions and on-premise solutions. So it's very important that we do the math and we make sure that the solution that we've chosen not only meets the requirements, but that it's also cost effective. And as you kind of look at the list here, we've got subscription, startup fees, transition services, which would be like professional services to move, ingress and egress fees, which is basically like a data transfer in and out of the cloud. It's interesting when you compare that to the right-hand side where we're talking about, things that we can actually touch and feel, the servers, the backups, the upgrades, the power, the cooling, all these things. When you look between the two, you can see really clearly where it's, CapEx versus OpEx. But the bottom line is that we need to make sure that we're including all of the costs in the calculations, not just, the monthly subscription fee. It's all the stuff that's associated with it to get, in and out of the cloud. Another important thing to think about is that the less control is given to the provider to run things as they see fit, the more expensive it's going to get to us. And one of the major reasons for this is the automation that the service providers are using to keep the cost down. And I will caveat this, and I'll say that layers below SaaS are typically dependent on usage or assigned resources. So if a VM is low usage VM, it might be cheaper to host in the cloud. And even when the cost is factored in, there may be other driving factors to putting a service or a VM in the cloud. For example, disaster recovery or high availability. But we kind of need to think about that, how much control are we willing to give up in order to save some money? So it's also important to think about, what the current investment is. And I've included a couple of examples here to get you thinking about, what some of those investments might be. But it's by no means an inclusive list. I mean, think about, the servers that you're running on premise. Did you just buy them? If so, maybe it makes sense to, postpone for a while or decide to repurpose them for a different project when you move that service into the cloud. What about the licensing? Do you have to renew your licensing annually? Is your software old? Do you want the features of the new software version? Does it make sense to maybe buy that new software version in the cloud rather than, purchase it and install it on-prem? And support agreements. Maybe you've got a long-term support agreement. How much time is left on that? And, if you decide that you no longer want to have that service agreement, how much is it going to cost for you to terminate that agreement? All these things kind of play into, does it make sense to, do cloud now or later? Another side of the calculations is how much effort is going to be required. What is it really going to take for me to get there? And sometimes it makes sense to hire an integrator, and then, the professional services costs need to be figured in. And also, maybe you use tools, and the tools can be used to reduce the amount of effort that's required. There's a lot of tools available, and a lot of them run in the cloud. Another case of cloud solving the problems it creates. Dell's software migration solutions are a great example of this. They had software that used to be installed, on premise, but now a lot of that is going to run, purely in the cloud. So with regards to SLAs, and I mentioned before that this isn't likely to cause a problem, but I do want to address it. Providers will often commit to specific SLAs. Like for Office 365, for example, it's 99.9% uptime before you start getting some credit back on your service. But often we don't even hold ourselves to specific SLAs with our on-premise systems. And with that in mind, it's really important for us to be realistic. The buzzword with regards to uptime is 5 nines. And before we hold a provider to requirement for 5 nines, I think it's really important for us to understand what that means, because it can get really expensive to obtain that level of uptime. So this is what 5 nines looks like. This is 5.26 minutes per year of downtime. And really we need to think about, is this what your business needs in order to operate? Is your business going to be crippled if you have 5.26 minutes per year of downtime or more? So, Wall Street needs it. Amazon, because they're huge transactional systems, they need that. But, do we really need it? Just something to think about. And this is what 99.9 or 3 nines looks like. So we're talking about 8 hours a year. And when I think about, all the customers that I've worked with in the past, I can think of very few who had systems that weren't down at least 8 hours per year, and their company did not come to a screeching halt. So just something to think about, as you consider moving stuff into the cloud, the SLAs. So the last piece I want to talk about with, sorry, I slid a slide back there. The last piece I want to address with regards to what goes in and what stays is the compliance. And in today's day and age, we do have a lot of, legally binding requirements to manage IT systems in a certain way. And, some companies don't have any at all, but many do. And it might be a requirement for the retention of data. It might be a requirement for the use of data loss prevention or DLP. The important thing to remember here is that providers do have compliance in mind. If you've got specific requirements like HIPAA, for example, ask the provider about compliance with the regulations. And it may not be the problem that you think it is. Here's some of the notes from Microsoft's Office 365 compliance. And this is available on their public website for anybody to see, so you can go out and you can browse out and you can see this. This is a small list of things that are done specifically for Exchange Online that can help companies meet their compliance requirements. In most cases, what you're going to find is that the providers are trying to break down barriers to entry wherever possible. They want you to buy the services, so they need to help you comply with your requirements. So in addition to being able to view the capabilities with regards to compliance, the information is also published that's specific to certain regulatory and compliance requirements. And this information also can be viewed online or downloaded. And again, what I'm showing you here is specific to Microsoft's Office 365, but other providers are going to have similar challenges and provide similar information. So if an internal stakeholder is pushing back, citing a regulatory or compliance requirement, make sure you do your homework and make sure that it's not really an imaginary barrier, because the provider may very well comply with whatever requirement you need. And the same is true for Amazon. This is a snapshot from their website, from their trust center. And IBM is the same way. So pretty much any provider is going to have this in mind when you talk about moving your stuff into the cloud with these requirements. With regards to what moves into the cloud and what stays on premise, I just want to kind of sum up a little bit about what we talked about. The most important thing is not to fall into that lift and shift trap, because most of us are going to be living in a hybrid cloud scenario for the foreseeable future. We basically just need to do what makes sense for the business. Do your due diligence with regards to the cost, the compliance, and the effort, the investment, your current investment, And once you take that services-based approach and analyze, the facts and the numbers, it's all going to make so much more sense. The key is to embrace the hybrid strategy and make deliberate movements into the cloud. So don't rush in and do everything. Do what makes sense for the business. So we covered a lot of information here today, and really this is just an introduction. And if you want some help developing your strategy, please do contact us. Our COO, George Hammerschmidt's information is on the screen now. And also I'd like to point out that all of the participants of this webinar are entitled to an on-site cloud strategy whiteboarding session free of charge. So please take advantage of that. Give us a call and let us know that you were in the webinar and you're interested in doing that. And a cloud architect like myself will come out and visit you, and we can whiteboard and talk about your strategy.